Hello, my name is Bill Hennigan. I'm here to take all your addresses and see what a nuclear weapon looks like if exploded above your house. No, I write about national security issues for the New York Times. I'm the lead writer on our series on the modern nuclear threat called At the Brink, which I hope you've seen. We just published a story. This is fortuitous, actually. We just published a story about what would happen if a nuclear weapon was detonated in space, and we base off those the findings, the scientific findings from the Cold War. So we know exactly what would happen. So it's kind of fortuitous because they sent this up several weeks ago before the story was even set to publish. So. At my left is General Bob Keeler. He's the former head of STRATCOM, which is U.S. Strategic Command, which oversees all U.S. nuclear forces. And before that, he was head of SPACECOM, correct? Yes. So Bob has one of the deepest backgrounds in this subject matter, and so I'm looking forward to our conversation. Just to set it off, no pun intended, I'd like the general to speak a little bit about his background and his experience.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the invitation. I was looking forward to this. I'm at the end of the program, and so unfortunately I couldn't join you and hear what the other speakers have had to say, but I looked at the schedule of events, and I know that you've had a great couple of days. So thanks for inviting me. Let me say a word about myself by way of introduction, and thanks, Bill, for the introduction. I entered the U.S. Air Force in 1975. I'm a product of the ROTC program, and I entered in the ICBM complex at Great Falls, Montana. And I understand that there are some folks here from Montana. There's some heads going like this. Wonderful place. 2 assignments there. I spent almost 7.5 years in Montana and fell in love with Montana. So, and I also found out something about the nuclear deterrence business from the first day that I set foot on an active duty Air Force base, because that is the 100% mission of those ICBM wings. It's deterrence. So I retired. Eventually, I worked my way up. I didn't expect to spend almost 39 years in the Air Force, but I did, and wound up my last 2 assignments. Well, let me back up just a little bit. So I served as an ICBM crew member, spent about the first half of my Air Force career in the nuclear part of the Air Force, in various things, to include in the Pentagon and elsewhere as a planner, and ultimately as a commander in the field of an ICBM squadron in Missouri, and then an ICBM group back in Montana. And then the Cold War ended, and there were big changes everywhere in our military. I'll say another word about that if you'd like to talk about that. And I wound up transitioning from the nuclear part of the Air Force into the space part of the Air Force, and spent basically the second half of my career in the space part of the business. My last 2 assignments were I commanded Air Force Space Command, which has now become the United States Space Force. That's different than Space Command, because we have a combatant command called United States Space Command, which is not the same as the Space Force, just as the Air Force and Strategic Command are not the same thing. So I commanded Air Force Space Command, and then was asked and selected to command United States Strategic Command. I retired on the 1st of January of 2014. And so I am no longer wearing a uniform, which means that everything I say to you at this point is my personal opinion. I don't represent the Air Force or STRATCOM or the Department of Defense or anyone except myself. So I will give you my perspective as a military officer, and that is a perspective that is non-political. So I'll offer my thoughts on the subjects today, and would appreciate you understanding that these are my personal perspectives based on a career in this kind of work, and the insights that I think I've gained.
So you're speaking on behalf of the U.S. government. One of the things that I think is most interesting about your career is you entered the military, in the bad old days, right? Especially when it comes to the ICBM force, there was a real risk, or it was reality that you could be turning the keys, that launching Armageddon as a launch officer. But by the time you retired, we had been in a period of, relative détente, right? The nuclear weapons had been pushed back. It was not as palpable. The fear was more about terrorism, and nuclear weapons were largely seen as being passé. So now that we have this new emergence and these new nuclear threats that we see popping up, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, when you first entered the force, what do you kind of see as the kind of the rhyming themes from your early days in the Air Force?
So let me back up a little bit, because I need to set the stage also for a little bit of perspective from my behalf. So President Reagan and President Gorbachev, if you remember, famously said nuclear wars cannot be won and must not be fought. And in 39 years of active service, I never met anyone in uniform who disagreed with that. The question is, how do we do it? And so the United States has chosen to take on this paradox of the nuclear age, which is, in order to prevent the use of nuclear weapons, you have to be prepared to use them, and that's called deterrence. And so our entire policy setup in the United States of America is deterrence, that we want to have a force that is seen by any adversary as capable of holding at risk those things that they value the most under any condition. And when I entered the Air Force and was assigned to an ICBM unit in Great Falls, Montana, our day-to-day mission was readiness. Make sure that we were ready to respond to presidential command if that ever became necessary. And there was a sense of urgency in the Cold War. We had an identifiable adversary who was sworn to destroy us. Said it publicly more than once. Remember? Well, you don't remember this. I barely remember it either, but Khrushchev pounding his shoe on the table at the United Nations saying, "We will bury you." And every minute of every day, we lived believing that this could be the minute that they would try to destroy us. And so, as time passed in the Cold War and that sense of urgency softened some on my watch, we eventually got to the point where, as I think everybody knows, the Soviet Union collapsed on its own without anybody having to fire a shot, and we all kind of patted ourselves on the back and said deterrence worked. Never mind the fact that the Russians still retained the capability, even after the Cold War, to destroy us, and retain that capability right now today. Do I think they'll do it today? Well, no, I don't. But a mentor of mine always said, when you're looking at an adversary, you've got to look at capability and intent. I don't think the Russians intend to launch a massive nuclear attack on the United States today, but they could. They don't intend to, but they have the capability to, and as long as they do, you have to deter it. That's the position that we've taken. So, at the end of the Cold War, I think there was a great exhale of breath. And for a time, it appeared as though what people in those days called the peace dividend would play out. It's not what happened, although today, that sense of urgency, I think, is still not the same as it was in the Cold War. And so that shapes the way our forces are postured today, our nuclear forces, the way they are postured. The fact that we have taken all of the bombers off of an immediate nuclear response kind of a posture, which happened in 1992, 91 or 92, and the supporting tankers aren't there. We stood down most of our airborne command and control organization. We have some that are still on alert, but we basically took a step back from what people described as this, which I think wrongfully they describe as a hair trigger, which we didn't have then, don't have now, and won't have. So what's different today? Well, one of the things that's different is the triad today, right now as we sit here, is really a dyad. We have ICBMs and submarines in a ready-to-use posture for the president to use if necessary. And by the way, the United States policy on this today is that we would consider using nuclear weapons in extreme circumstances involving vital national interests. Extreme circumstances. So I think that there's a difference. We've had remarkable policy continuity from the Cold War to today. There have been some evolutionary changes in policy, not revolutionary changes in U.S. policy. But I think that we have basically stepped back from the sense of urgency, even though we have forces that are ready to use. And so today, those forces, while there are still some forces available to use, they are far smaller in number. They don't include bombers unless the president ordered them back into a nuclear posture. And in general terms, I think the reductions that have occurred through arms control, the reductions that have occurred through other presidential initiatives and other things that we and the Russians have done have made a positive difference in our security. But today, we now find ourselves in a different situation, and that is what some have called the return to great power competition, or others have called the two nuclear peer problem. And when you look at what China is doing, for example, Russia, it's an interesting case study in and of itself. We could spend a couple of seminars on what's happening with Russia, but you know, they're rattling their nuclear saber just about every day. And they still retain the capability to destroy the United States quickly if they chose to do that, and they retain a vast number of theater level or tactical, what some people call tactical nuclear weapons. What's really different is that the Chinese have decided that our strategic choices to have a triad make sense. And so they have decided that they are going to have one as well. They are building ICBM silos. They are doing other things that you all are reporting on, as a matter of fact, and I'm glad you are. They are upgrading their nuclear systems. They're upgrading their weapons. They're upgrading their command and control systems. And in fact, if you haven't read it, the Congressional Commission on the Posture, the Strategic Posture of the U.S., which I think is what it was called, unfortunately was released at about the same time in October of 2023 that Hamas invaded Israel. And so,
what happened there? I hadn't heard about
that. Yeah, not much going on there, right? So I think it would be interesting reading for all of you if you haven't read it. It does a very good job, I think, about capturing this issue about something that we didn't face in the Cold War. We had a single nuclear peer adversary that we understood, and it took us a long time to understand them, but by the end of the Cold War, we understood what the Soviet nuclear program was all about and what their forces could do and what their command and control looked like and how we thought they would intend to use them and all of the pieces that go with that. Not so much with the Chinese. There are lots of questions out there about what their intentions really are. And while this is part of their stated objectives to become a world-class power, again, they think restoring their position as a world-class power, as I understand it, includes an element that will be a nuclear deterrent of their own. And so how do we deal with that? What must we do? Is our modernization effort sufficient? And the Posture Commission offered that it may not be. So I think we've got some challenges ahead of us here, facing a new set of world conditions.
And I think that's the So you said we kind of we wound things back a bit. Since you're when you first when you were a young officer, but a lot of those ideas are coming back, right? The Strategic Posture Commission. I know that they are sensitive to this criticism, but it was largely seen as advocating for a build-up. They don't make this stated about going past New Start numbers, but it certainly bolstered that argument. You also see conversations about putting the bombers back on alert. That's B-52s sitting in places like Louisiana and where you were in Whiteman, Missouri. Or not, they're not in Whiteman. They're in...
B-2s are at Whiteman.
Yeah, the B-2s are at Whiteman. They're at Minot.
Minot.
Okay. Pretty cold up there in Minot. But, a lot of these old ideas are coming back again. And one of the things that you said, we don't have a hair trigger alert, but it's pretty close. There are 2 officers, sitting in hundreds of capsules across the Great North, the plains, and they're ready and willing to launch if they're ever given an order. That might not be hair trigger by your assessment, but to many others, I think it doesn't take that much to get the system going. And I think one of the things that surprises people, and one of the things that we've learned through writing the series At the Brink, is how much power that the president actually has when it comes to nuclear weapons. It's almost the president's own arsenal. I mean, his power is absolute. And I think with the election of Donald Trump, people have a lot of questions, as we saw at the end of his first administration, about, the checks and balances and sole authority. You were in the seat at Stratcom at a time where I don't think that those questions were being asked as often. But if you could you kind of enlighten us a little bit about, do you see an issue with sole authority? Do you think it's time to revise that? Do you have any concerns?
So that's a lot of questions. Let me start with, I don't call it hair trigger, and you shouldn't either, but that's another story. So let's go back to, at the end of the Cold War, the foundational importance of our nuclear deterrent did not change. That foundational importance has remained from the end of the Cold War through to today. But in U.S. policy, what the policymakers said was, we're going to reduce the role of nuclear weapons, while in fact we made a lot of changes, practical changes to the force and its force posture. So a lot of the thinking about deterrence and a lot of the cottage industry in academia and elsewhere that used to accompany all of this declined. And in fact, we had a reduction in the experience base, even in the uniforms and out of the uniforms, with people who consider these issues. And so, there was the peace dividend piece to all of this when we thought that we actually deferred investment in the nuclear force. We deferred modernization in the nuclear force. We deferred our attention to the people at the tip of the nuclear spear. And that resulted in some problems for us that we had to reverse. And then 9/11 occurred. And of course that diverted us and I'm not being critical of this, but for all the reasons that you would understand and we know, we diverted our attention for almost 20 years after 9/11 to other things. So now we find ourselves today in a place where modernization has been deferred way past end of life for a lot of these foundational systems. And so, given that we are going to continue to rely on deterrence as the foundation of our national security, and I believe that's still the right thing to do, then investment is required. And we've deferred it for so long that investment is going to be a bigger challenge than it would have been had we done this sequentially. We're now doing this simultaneously. And so this is a problem for the policymakers and the budget people and everybody else who is interested in this to include nuclear command and control, which is the central nervous system for the entire system. Now, a couple of things. So that gets to what about this nuclear command and control system, and how do we make nuclear decisions? So let me say a couple of words about this. There's a professor at Duke University, Peter Feaver, who has captured the demand signal that the policymakers have placed on the nuclear command and control system in 4 words: always, never, civilian control. Those are 3 different pieces. It's not never civilian control. It's always dash never dash civilian control. All right. What's the always part? The always part is that the policymakers insist that nuclear forces be constantly connected to the senior decision maker here, which is the commander-in-chief, under all conditions of stress. That's the always part. That's a big ask, and particularly today when we start talking about things like autonomy and where does artificial intelligence fit into this, and fake news and other things that are out there where people are intentionally trying to spoof, and other challenges that we have in systems today. I understand you had some trouble connecting to the internet here. So those are real issues that we need to go address in the always part. The never part is equally important, and that is that nuclear weapons can never be used accidentally, unintentionally, etc. And then the civilian control is they must always be under the control of our civilians. That's the way our system works. Our military is subservient to civilian authority, and which is exactly the way it ought to be. So, how do we do that? And over time, beginning early in the Cold War, the civilian control part was basically all the authority to use nuclear weapons in combat was placed in the hands of the commander-in-chief, the President of the United States. For a while, beginning with Eisenhower, because they were worried about a decapitation strike that would take the president out of the system, there was delegation of authority to certain commanders in the field to use nuclear weapons under certain conditions. All of that went away. People asked me, they would say, "So, do you have authority to use those weapons?" I said, "Nope." "Now, come on, you can tell me." It's a little bit like people asking me when I was Space Command about the aliens at Area 51. Yeah, there are aliens out there, aren't there? "No." "Come on, you can tell me." No, the answer is no. The answer is no. Did you, commander of STRATCOM, have authority to use nuclear weapons in combat? No, I did not. Neither did any other subordinate commander below the level of the commander-in-chief. So, the commander-in-chief has sole authority. Only the President of the United States can authorize the use of U.S. nuclear weapons. Sometimes Congress questions that, and I've been asked that at a hearing after I retired, which was an uncomfortable hearing, actually, because what I said. But well, let me get into this in a second. So, if Congress has an issue with the president's authority to use military force, then that's an Article 1, Article 2 of the Constitution issue for them to go resolve. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I am not a constitutional historian. But in my reading, I believe that Article 1, Article 2 issue has existed, let me think, since the Constitution was ratified. It's a question of the limits of presidential authority to employ military force. In this case, it happens to be nuclear weapons. I don't know what the policymakers would decide, but it's up to them to decide it. And then the military is going to do exactly what it is that they've decided. What we have today, though, I would say from a military perspective, is absolute clarity in the chain of command. Absolute clarity. And why is that important? Because another U.S. policy tenet of nuclear weapons is we must use them in accordance with the laws of armed conflict. So, That's true, by the way, with pulling the trigger on a rifle. Every U.S. military person must follow the law. And so I've been asked that before. The answer is, a more refined answer is, we don't sit there screening orders. They're presumed to be legal, but we don't blindly follow them either. I was only following orders was not an excuse at Nuremberg. It wasn't an excuse for Lieutenant Calley. So we've got to have absolute clarity, because down there in that Missile Launch Control Center, as a crew member, I didn't have a way of knowing whether or not I was being given a legal order because I couldn't see the target. I had to trust the command chain. I had to trust that somebody up that chain had gone through the process of making sure, excuse me, that we were doing something that was in the interest of the nation, and that what I was being told to do was legal. And what I knew for sure as a crew member was that everything that I was going to be ordered to do, potentially, hopefully never, but potentially, was through a screening process that I was going to be told to do something that was legal. And, oh, by the way, the United States of America has never said, nor do we agree, that nuclear weapons are inherently illegal or immoral. So, it's important that the people at the tip of the nuclear spear, I'm pointing down because that's where the ICBM silos are. It's also up there, it's also under the water. It's important that they understand that that they can trust the chain of command. That's why, by the way, character is important in the chain of command, and that's why the service academies have the motto, we don't lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do. It's all part of trust and confidence in the chain of command. People would say to me, well, you're not in the chain of command as the commander of STRATCOM, and my answer was, yes, I absolutely am in the chain of command. But the authority to use nuclear weapons doesn't flow down through the chain of command if they're ever ordered to be used. It goes directly from the commander-in-chief to the forces. Now, we say directly to the forces. What we mean is the President of the United States, through a series of safeguards, would give an order. That order gets translated into a message that goes to the forces, and a command center has to do that. So a senator said to me, so what are the safeguards there? I said, well, there are safeguards, but there's no two-person control safeguard. Ha-ha, General, there's no two-person safeguard on the commander-in-chief. And the answer is, well, not the same. The two-person control, positive control begins with the commander-in-chief. Two-person control begins below the commander-in-chief. Two-person control is not a command authority. A presidential order is a command authority. There's a difference. So at every other level, two people have to act in concert. They can monitor one another, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. At the level of the commander-in-chief is the decision maker for an order to use the weapons. The commander-in-chief has that authority to order the use of military force in other cases as well. We don't split the authority, the command authority of the commander-in-chief. Again, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, and you could probably quibble with me, and maybe there's a lawyer in the room who could tell me I'm wrong. But the fact of the matter is we have that process here that begins in the chain of command. If we were talking about a conventional operation, the commander-in-chief would order the military to go do something. A combatant commander would receive the order, translate that order down to the forces, et cetera. That's not the way we do this for nuclear weapons. And, oh, by the way, if nuclear weapons are ordered for use, there are specific weapons ordered for specific targets for a specific amount of time. Every other weapon remains under positive control. Are there safeguards in the system? There are safeguards everywhere. And ultimately, there's a de facto safeguard, and that's the legal process that an order would go through prior to it being ordered.
And, I understand that you believe that the system is quite clear. And I understand that you also, that personal belief doesn't really matter because we have the Constitution. That's the way that these things are laid out, and this is a matter that Congress is going to have to sort out if it's going to. But personally, do you have have you had concern about the way that the president has this unilateral power?
I've not been concerned about that. I am confident in the process, and I am confident in the safeguards that exist. We go to extraordinary lengths. You know, people, and this gets back to the hair trigger thing. Hair trigger suggests that something unintentional could happen, or something. There could be a misunderstanding. So you can't prevent misunderstandings, but what you can do is you can make sure that the process accounts for the possibility of a misunderstanding. You know, people cite the 1980 false alarm, you know, the tapes that got loaded by mistake and got transmitted out into the system. And it's a great story.
Maybe you should set that up a little bit.
Yeah, so NORAD was running an exercise, and they had loaded simulation tapes to display for the exercise, and for whatever reason, those got translated into actual displays.
So the military believed that there were incoming.
Yeah,
for
a very short time there was confusion about what was happening here.
That there could have been a salvo from the Soviet Union
right.
incoming to the United States.
Right. And that confusion didn't last very long, a matter of minutes.
Those are pretty important minutes, though.
No denying that. No denying that. And not acceptable, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying here with that. This is not a big deal. It is a big deal. But I think the sort of the folklore that has gone with this is that we were that close, and that's not so. And the reason for that is the safeguards that go with it. So, you know, we rely on specially certified machines, but mostly what you need to know about the system is human beings are at every level. Human beings are ultimately decision makers here. Nothing happens automatically in the system. So at any rate, this was resolved, and then, of course, additional checks and balances were put in place after that. So there are safeguards at every level of the system. And we expend an enormous amount of time and energy to try as best we can humanly try to make sure that there aren't other faults in the system that could result in some unintentional activity.
I do think that there are possibly millions of Americans, almost assuredly millions of Americans, who are concerned that it would be an intentional launch order rather than a misunderstanding. But I want to touch on something that you pointed out. There are humans at every point in the chain, but you know the emergence of artificial intelligence has kind of sparked this conversation about introducing AI into the system because you have less reaction time and AI can sort through things that humans are just simply incapable of doing. I've heard General Cotton talk about that they're thinking about AI, but that it would stay any power of launch and any of that would stay with active service members. But do you see, looking ahead here and seeing there are benefits of AI? Do you have any concerns about that finding its way into command and control?
So I hate to use the word concern, so let me just say caution. I think that we need to be cautious about how we do it. And I think we need to go back. What's the fundamental principle here? For nuclear command and control in particular, it's humans in the loop, nothing happens automatically. Specially certified systems that we can rely on because we have dual phenomenology, we have redundancies, we have other ways that we're not relying on one single source with one single voice doing the talking. And then it is a deliberative process. And remember what I said, since the end of the Cold War, the sense of urgency has receded. So the likelihood that people would see something happening and automatically presume that this was Armageddon beginning is not the same perspective that you find throughout the uniforms today as you found perhaps in the Cold War, when that was sort of the driving issue on everything that we did. It wasn't to make it so. It was to understand that we had an adversary who threatened that actively and then had the wherewithal to do it. So being sure that we could survive, that we were resilient, that we could respond, and that gets all the way up to launching under attack, which is another thing that concerns lots of people, that capability existed to enhance deterrence. So I think since deterrence remains foundational, I think it's still important to remember that the sense of urgency is not the same today that it was then. And so that's one piece of this. But the other pieces of this, I think, are equally compelling. Multiple sources, a recognition that people might be trying to feed us false information. It's happening every day, sort of in the unclassified ways that we all see these things. And so what's the role for artificial intelligence? What's the role for autonomy? And I think that as we think these things through, and particularly inside the department as they think these things through, I think it's important to begin by saying, this is what we believe this should do for us. This is how it assists the human beings. This is not how it takes the place of the human beings. This is what it's good for. This is what we need. And I've heard General Cotton talk about that as well, by saying, what is artificial intelligence good for? Well, we are swimming, we're drowning in data. Can it help us sort that out? And if so, how do we want to do it with the safeguards in place that we know that we're not going to be misled? And then ultimately, in the decision process, there's a conference that occurs among advisors and the commander-in-chief. So, again, I think a caution about artificial intelligence is appropriate. A caution about autonomy is appropriate. I think we could think about artificial intelligence and autonomy the same way we think about human beings. When we send an airman out to do a mission, or we send a pilot out to fly a mission, they are doing that within a set of rules of engagement. We need to provide, excuse me, we need to provide an autonomous system with rules of engagement, just as we would a human. What do those rules look like? How do we think our way through that? And I know there are people actively thinking their way through it. We've flown drones now for quite some time. And a lot of lessons have been learned from all of that. And we see things unfolding in Ukraine, for example. There are huge changes coming here in not the nature of war, but the character of war. And so how do we manage these things? I think it's critically important.
You pointed out that the U.S. government hasn't took a holiday when it came to investing in nuclear weapons. It wasn't just the delivery systems, which is the most visible part of it. The bombers, the subs, the ICBMs, the missiles, but it's also our ability to build these weapons, the warheads themselves, and the various labs are now trying to reconstitute that capability. It's very costly, and it's challenging as well, because we haven't, we have a kind of a gap in between, those that are experienced in doing this sort of work, and the younger people who came of age, trying to learn about it. So they're trying to bridge that gap. It's very challenging, but it's all going to cost almost $2 trillion over 30 years. And do you see ways that do you think that the United States should rethink the way that it's going about its modernization effort? Do you think that this sort of one-for-one replacement of swapping out these older systems and putting in new ones in their stead should be rethought in a way, because there has been technology advances, there are new capabilities, that perhaps we don't need to just step in the same footprint that we established during the Cold War?
Yeah, I think it's always good to look at all of that, and I think that I think we the military need to make sure that we are always looking at those factors for all the obvious reasons, and I think the American public should insist that we look at all those things for those obvious reasons as well. But I think you need to step back and say, so what makes the most strategic sense for us to maintain the deterrent? And my personal view is there isn't anything that makes more strategic sense for us than to sustain the triad. And that's because the three big attributes in the triad continue to make sense. And those attributes are survivability, and of course we get that today out of our ballistic missile submarine. Each of the legs has a little bit of each of these, but primarily we rely on the submarines to provide the most survivable part of the force, and that's why, under New START rules, we would ultimately deploy, if all the submarines were deployed, most of our weapons would be deployed in a survivable fashion at sea. We also maintain an ICBM force because they are responsive.
Hair trigger alert?
There is no such thing as a hair trigger alert. So they are a rapid response force. They're not aimed at any target today other than broad ocean areas. They would have to be retargeted if given a presidential order to launch. They can be retargeted pretty quickly, but they do not sit there on any targets on any landmass on a day-to-day basis. We pick broad ocean areas, and there are a series of steps throughout all of the forces that you have to go to, which is why hair triggers suggest to me that, it's the old cowboy thing. Right? That's a pistol we're talking about there, that they filed off all the stuff and did all that stuff, and they've cocked the hammer, and the cowboy is standing there with his finger on the trigger. That is not the way those forces are on a day-to-day basis. They have to cock the hammer, then you pull the trigger. The hammer cocking part needs to come to them in a message. So, those are unlock codes. The weapons are locked on a day-to-day basis. So that's not new. That's not new news either. That's something that we've said for a very long time. So that's different than the cowboy perception of hair trigger. So, hang on.
Modernization.
So let me get back to the modernization piece. So modernization of the ICBM force makes sense to me as well. People talk about the vulnerability of the ICBMs. The ICBMs are vulnerable, have been vulnerable for a long time, to a massive attack from the Russians. That's what it takes. So Russian planners have to contend under New START limits. In particular, they've got to contend with, how do you deal with the ICBM force? And then finally, we have the bomber force, which is the most flexible. You can put them on nuclear alert or not. You can use them in a conventional sense. And, of course, one of the policy directives that the military has had for quite some time here is look for ways that we can substitute conventional weapons for nuclear weapons, which is a planning challenge. It's not that you can't do it in some cases. It's a challenge to the planners to make sure that they are thinking that way. And so you can do that as well. And so you can launch bombers. You can put them on what are called positive control turnaround points. They go to a certain point and they wait. And so I did have authority as the commander of STRATCOM, if we had bombers on alert, to launch them for survivability, and they would go as far as a specific point and they would wait. And if they didn't get an order to go, they would come home. And that order to go would have to come from the president, the sole authority. So the modernization effort that's underway in the B-21, which is underway, which is a stealth platform to ultimately replace the B-2 in larger numbers, and then a modernization program for the B-52 makes sense to me. The B-52 is an unbelievable platform. Tankers, supporting tankers are important as well. I also think that given the two nuclear peer problem and the issue in the Pacific, I am in favor of redeploying a nuclear-armed cruise missile on selected platforms. That was one of the things that the Posture Commission talked about. And I'm in favor of that. I think that, remember now, we have nuclear weapons for three purposes. One is deterrence. One is assurance. We're extending our nuclear umbrella to our allies. And that's the assurance piece of this. And by the way, in deterrence, the adversary gets a vote. In assurance, the ally gets a vote. And if you've been keeping up to date with the conversations we've been having with the South Koreans, for example, now that the North Koreans are nuclear armed, new arrangements, new policy level arrangements being made there to make sure that there's closer consultation. Same thing with the Japanese, etc. They are under the nuclear threat there now in a way that they haven't been before.
Would you advocate other land-based systems, for instance, now that we're no longer under INF?
I am, again, my personal opinion, I am comfortable at this point with the theater systems that we've deployed. Remember now, the F-35 has now been nuclear certified. And there's a new gravity warhead for them to be able to use, all of our aircraft to be able to use, that the labs are producing. And you asked a question about the labs before, too, and I'm equally concerned about the ability of the labs to keep up. You know, remember now that our nuclear infrastructure is an industrial infrastructure. It has the same problems that lots of other industries do with talent and experience. And remember now that we have asked the Department of Energy to tell us every year that the stockpile is safe, secure, and reliable. And they are doing that now since 1992 in an era of no nuclear testing, no nuclear detonations. You know, they can test the electronics and other things that they do, but with no nuclear yield. And so how do you do it? Well, they've come up with a way to basically replace the actual detonations with simulations.
So, and I'll get to a space question, but I while you're talking, I'm just thinking about, you know, there was a real period of time there where, you know, because we're talking about getting all the machine going again, and you know, which they've started, right? And I traveled across the country to see all these different places where they're building the bomber, they're building the missiles, they're building the new warheads, they're building the new subs, and it's a challenge, but it's kind of, I have this question to myself, like, was there a period of time, you know, could we have done something different, you know, during that period of time where we were continually reducing, we were rolling it back? You know, I know that our adversaries also have a vote, and they've made aggressive decisions that we are responding to. But we did have a period of time where things had settled down. And do you believe that was there something that could have been done in that grace period that could have staved off where we find ourselves today?
It's a great question, and I don't know the answer. People have speculated, was there a lost opportunity there somewhere along the way? I don't know. Hindsight is perfect, I think. I don't know. I will add, though, something to your earlier question. All of these modernization efforts and the policy way forward, of course, there will be a new administration. And I don't know what the new administration will do with any or all of this. They will certainly have their own view about how to shape it all. And so we'll have to wait and see. I have no insight. I don't know what
I can make a
what
guess.
I'm going to say. I don't speculate on those things. You can guess away.
Yeah. The space. What about those aliens at Area 50? No.
Yeah. Well, look, I can tell you. No, it's incredible how often I got that question.
I'm sure. So we just published a story that basically talked a little bit about the analysis that went into this Russian spacecraft that's the U.S. intelligence says is testing components for a orbital nuclear weapon. And the article, the essay makes the argument that we're now at a place we're investing in space at a clip that I think would be pretty hard to imagine even 10 years ago in terms of the number of satellites on orbit. The U.S. military, as you well know, almost all of the capabilities are derived from space in some capacity. Does the lack of norms and the lack of strategic agreements in outer space is it time to embark on something more meaningful in the space domain?
Yes, I favor some kind of rules of the road. And I favored that while I was still wearing a uniform, and I certainly favored that at Air Force Space Command, and at Stratcom. So you might ask, well, why is that? First of all, the reliance that we have on space today, not just for national security, which is critical, but our economy depends on it, our lives depend on it. The world has now begun to depend on space in ways that we never thought were going to be possible. There's obviously and always the scientific discovery piece of all of this, but as a practical matter, our lives are touched minute by minute right here, sitting here today, by things that are happening in space and the way information is transiting space and all of the things that go with that. So what's different? Well, during the Cold War, you can go back and read some books about what the United States thought would happen in the Cold War. The Russians had a nuclear-tipped anti-satellite weapon, ground-based nuclear-tipped anti-satellite weapon, and we figured if World War III began, they would use it. The difference was it would not have been decisive because we were not using space in a way that would have made it decisive in those days. Would it have hurt? Yeah, probably would have hindered some things, but would it have been decisive? No. Would it be decisive today? I can tell you that there are people in the United States Space Force who are working pretty hard to improve the resilience of the systems and the architecture that was deployed in a far different world when the active threats to our spacecraft either didn't materialize or didn't have the same characteristics or didn't have the same potential impact. So, yeah, it could be decisive today, not only decisive for our national security and military operations, but decisive for everything we do, our economy and other things. So, is it important? Yes. Plus, back when I was commander of Air Force Space Command, I think the number we used was 22,000 objects that we were tracking in orbit. Most of that was debris. There were not thousands of active satellites. I think I read just the other day, Starlink 7,000. That number sticks in my head. Don't quote me on that. Well, in fact, don't quote me on anything. I know
It
you're
is.
going
It
to,
is.
but-
It is 7. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would they have plans to at least double it?
Yeah, and I think he's talking 14,000, 16,000, something like that. And he's not the only one.
Bezos is doing it too.
Bezos is doing it. The Chinese are doing it. Everybody
The
believes.
Pentagon
that-
has plans to do it.
Well, then there's that. So I think the question becomes, at what point in time are you going to have some kind of a system that mimics, just maybe mimics, maybe it's not the same concept, but maybe it's a little bit like the air traffic control system, the International Air Traffic Control System. I don't know how we're going to manage it all if we don't. So I said that one time when I was wearing a uniform in a public conversation, and I said, we need rules of the road, speed limits. And somebody said, speed limits don't stop speeders. And I said, no, they don't, but it tells you who they are. And that's why you need rules of the road. So should we say it's okay to maneuver your satellite 10 feet from yours? Well, here's something I learned from a satellite builder a long time ago. Any satellite can be an anti-satellite weapon if you run it into something else. And any satellite that maneuvers can do it. Now, you space purists would argue with me about orbital inclinations and, rendezvous and all. I get it. Not everyone could do it, but a lot of them could. Some of them do it when it's not on purpose. We've seen that happen before. We maneuver the International Space Station periodically. So, look, we're going to have to do something here. And it's going to have to be sooner rather than later. The United States advocated rules of the road at the UN more than once. There are other views around the world about all of this too. But I think the time has come. And I mean, there are some practical things I think we could do about deconfliction. And even now today, and this was true when I commanded a space launch unit out at Vandenberg in the mid-1990s, before we launched, we did an assessment of what was going to pass by through the corridor that we were launching through, because you had to make sure that we weren't going to unintentionally run into somebody, and pretty expensive things on top of those rockets. And so, and now, even if one of them isn't expensive, 30 of them together is pretty expensive. So I think that we're going to have to do something, and it's going to have to be sooner rather than later.
Looks like we have about 2 minutes left.
Darn the luck.
Yeah. Just to, spin it forward a bit, what would you like to see within the next, 4 years in the Trump administration? What are things that you'd like to see happen to reduce risk, to, turn this bad trajectory that we seem to be on around?
Yeah, I think there are two things, and it wouldn't matter whose administration. That it doesn't matter to me. The conversation we've been having is agnostic about all that from my perspective. And so I think there are a couple of things. One is, although this may sound contrarian to some of you, the modernization effort is a bipartisan effort, and we should, and let me replace that word, we must continue with the modernization effort for the nuclear deterrent. I think it's foundational. As far as I can see in the future, it's going to remain foundational. I understand that there are some people who believe that global zero is the right goal. I don't disagree. The question is, how quickly do you think you could get there? And in my humble view anyway, the world situation doesn't lend itself to that pathway at this time. So I think we're going to need a nuclear deterrent as far into the strategic future as I can see. And I think that promotes stability. The second thing is we need to talk to one another. We were trying, even while I was in the seat at Stratcom, to renew mill-to-mill conversations. That's not the only place where we need to talk. We need to talk at the policy level too. But there is something about mill-to-mill conversation among military professionals that creates understanding. And I think that's sorely lacking today. particularly with the Chinese, because I don't think we have that kind of relationship. Over time in the Cold War, we developed that kind of relationship with our Soviet counterparts, and I think that was beneficial. Even when we got mad at one another, that's when it was really beneficial, right? It's really beneficial if you're mad at one another. So I think that restoring those conversations as soon as we can, as best as we can, and I'm never one who says talk just to talk, but I do think that restoring those contacts that become more of a routine set of contacts is very, very important. And then I think finally I would always urge consistency in U.S. Policy related to nuclear matters. Again, are changes warranted? Well, every administration comes in with their views about what needs to be changed. So be it. That's fine. But again, I think we've been remarkably consistent over decades with our nuclear posture and our nuclear thinking. So I think that every administration adds something along the way. I think that we have seen policy improvements along the way. And so I would just advise any administration of any party persuasion with anyone coming in the door to look carefully at our nuclear posture again, and then make those sensible changes that are probably wise.
Well, I could talk to you for another hour or two, but thank you very much, sir. Really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Yep. Thank you all. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Just a few things before we leave here. I did get Kendrick Lamar tickets, so that's been great. I did not. Okay, let's hear for Kendrick Lamar. Thank you so much. But thanks to Bob and Bill. That was amazing. Just a reminder that Bob will be here to chat with you if you like. Also, again, Bill Hennigan is an Outrider Fellow, and you can read all of his work, the At the Brink series here at the New York Times. Because we know you love QR codes, we've provided another one for you. So, again, it's extraordinary, remarkable work. So we're going to leave that up for just one more minute. All right. And again, we'll send this out. You're going to hear a lot from Andy. So another thank you to our partners. So many partners to make this tenable. Even, again, Carnegie, Prospect Hill, Pulitzer Center, Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, so many folks who have supported us in this valiant effort. Also, as a reminder, the 2025 Outrider Nuclear Reporting Summit and a Titan II nuclear missile silo outside of Little Rock next October. So you can apply now. It'll be smaller because, again, nuclear missile silo is not known for their conference capacity. So it's up there. And we also want to encourage you to share this with editors as well. We want to get more people aware, more people in these conversations. One more thing we would like you to share with editors. Next up. We already have a new bit of programming here. So you can register now. Scott Sagan from CSAC at Stanford University, as well as DC's own Rachel Oswald from Congressional Quarterly Roll Call, will be talking about President Trump's nuclear challenges and the dangers ahead. So that is Thursday, January 30th. It's designed actually for not only all of you, but like editors who might have a hard time leaving their desk. So it's a way to think about these things. So please register. You can take the link, send it to your editors. We want as many editors and as many reporters there as we can get. So I'm going to leave that up. All right. We have one more QR code. Please take our survey. If you had a good time here, even if you didn't, let us know. We want to do this again. This is designed for all of you. We want to know how to make it better. Tell us what you enjoyed. Tell us what you want more of. You can even say less of, unless it's Kendrick Lamar. But let us know. It's valuable. We hope we will share it with our partners so we can make this better for you. I think there are a total of 4 questions, so you can fill it out right now. In fact, we're going to leave it up. And then one last thing. For those of you going to the White House with me, we're going to leave at 1:15. So I'll just be down in the foyer, again, 1 floor down. And I think I've communicated with everybody about that. But again, thank you to Spark Street, all these guys who make this happen, my colleague David Vitzi, Andy Adams. Let's hear it for them. Travel safe.